Sarah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Sure. Jim Bird, how are you? We're looking. There you go.
I'm doing good, Mark. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Thank you. Long time no talk.
That's right. Yeah, it's been a while.
For those of you that don't know BIDS trading, why don't you give them kind of a quick overview? What is BIDS about?
We're an institutional trading platform in the United States and in Europe. We provide a safe and secure platform for institutional traders to trade large blocks of stock.
Cool. All right.
Related marketplace in both U.S. and in Europe.
Great. Then I'm interested in hearing about what you're doing, definitely, because what you're talking about, I mean, I follow Michael Lewis, so all I know about this stuff is Flash Boys and all the stuff that he's been.
Well, we won't be talking about that stuff, that's for sure.
All right. I'll turn it over to you, Jim. Go ahead and share your slide deck.
Okay. Screen share. Just give me a moment, Mark. It takes a little moment for this to come up.
There, I see the screen share. You're going to full mode from the beginning. There you go. And I'll get into the background, and you're ready to go.
Well, let's make sure the show starts first, and in case you have to help me do something in the meantime. Right. Okay, what do you see now?
I see your presenter view. I see your notes view, not
okay.
Not the full thing from the beginning.
And I want to swap that. Now you see.
Excellent, beautiful.
All right.
And then down at the very bottom, I see the Google Hangouts. Just hide that. There you go.
Oh,
all right, I'm here behind you if you need it.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, great. All right, we're going to talk today about 5 quick wins for securing continuous delivery. First of all, a little background on me, why you should listen to me. I've had over 20 years, actually quite a lot more than 20 years now, of experience in the IT industry. Most of my experience is more on the software side and operations side. I work in the security. I'm responsible for security for our firm, but I've come to it from an operations and like an IT operations and security angle and background. I've worked with stock exchanges and banks all around the world for quite a long time. I'm the CTO of our firm, and I've still implementing DevOps practices. So we've been following DevOps practices for several years now in a highly regulated environment. I also help out at the SANS Institute. I'm an analyst there and a co-author of their secure DevOps courses, and I help out with different OWASP projects. And if you have developers who care about secure software, please have them check out the Proactive Controls. That's a project that I am a co-manager, co-project leader on, or whatever, and I feel very strongly about it. I think it's a great project, so to put a plug in for that. And I've also written a bunch of blogs and articles and written books or co-written books on Agile application security and DevOps security. Couple of disclaimers, not representing my employer in official capacity necessarily. I'm not selling you anything. And I'm going to talk about some techniques that I've seen work, both in my firm and in many others, but your mileage may vary. So first of all, as some quick background, let's kind of my perspective on DevOps. Kind of think of it coming from a development background. It's Agile on steroids, right? So you had a case where Agile teams, we've been working in Agile environments for quite some time. Agile teams would just simply run into that wall in operations, wouldn't be able to get things done fast enough. So you had this disconnect and this frustration and cost and other issues. And essentially what I see is DevOps is applying Agile practices and values to that last mile into production and into the ongoing life of the system. And we're changing from people thinking of delivering products or projects to essentially running systems, right? Or running services, right? So that service-based idea where now developers are responsible for owning those services end to end and keeping them running. And the other important thing here is about the continuous feedback loop. So that's one of the things that takes teams a while to understand and appreciate, including security teams, is this idea of creating feedback loops not necessarily knowing that you can't, realizing that you can't get everything perfect the first time, and using feedback loops to optimize and improve and learn. And all of this requires extensive automation, which leads to incredible hype from amazing vendors. Some are more amazing than others, but there's some good vendors in this space, and there's a bunch of other people just make a lot of noise. One of the big issues here from a security and compliance standpoint, so being in a very highly regulated space, you take a look at this and say, DevOps teams are moving so fast, how do you deal with it? How do you identify and contain the risks when self-managing teams are making decisions on their own? If you're using change advisory boards, how do you deal with that? Like, how do they possibly keep up with changes that are deployed several times a day sometimes, or at least several times a week? Your annual pen tests and periodic vulnerability assessments, if you're doing quarterly or monthly vulnerability assessments, they're quickly made irrelevant and out of date. And then how can you prove compliance when you've got developers owning systems, pushing things out on their own, and running them in production? And one of the other real challenges that I've seen a lot of organizations face is this whole idea that lean development and delivery, the whole focus on speed and cost and efficiency, is ensuring that anything that isn't efficient gets cut, and that includes security. If it's not efficient, if it gets in the team's way, it's going to get cut out. So even though there's all these perceived risks or potential risks with moving so fast, with continuous delivery and continuous deployment of changes, you also get some built-in risk management that's important to understand and to take advantage of. So one of them is that because people are breaking work down in small pieces, that's going to reduce delivery costs and risks. And we've already proved that with Agile development. Now continuous delivery just allows us to take greater advantage of that, right? Reduce the operational risk, project risk, delivery risk, that kind of thing. Continuous delivery also ensures that we can get everything done through that last mile into production. So, automating those pipelines and getting the pain out of it, making change become routine is helping take the risk out of making changes. So you don't have these big bang changes. And again, it's one of the big positive messages that we have. And that change becomes cheap. And because change becomes cheap and routine and safe, it means that people can afford to make smaller changes. They can break things down. So you get this virtuous circle, right? Because you've got people making smaller changes, deploying them more often. And because they can deploy them more often, they can make even smaller changes. So they can afford to make very small bets, and they can iterate through these things. And rather than trying to anticipate things and building in too much code and creating a larger attack surface or more problems, more potential operational problems and risks. And one of the big advantages from a security perspective is that because you can push out changes fast, that means you can also push out fixes fast, right? So you can push out patches and vulnerabilities very quickly and efficiently, which takes away some of the argument about, what are we going to do? How are we going to get these things fixed, right? So I want to talk about 5 steps that you can take, or 5 quick wins in the space of how to secure continuous delivery and continuous automated build pipelines and these kinds of things. And if you want to think about it, how can you make DevOps secure? You got to do security in the same way that the DevOps teams are working. So you want to become iterative and incremental. You want to work that way. So rather than trying to solve all the problems or solve all the problems perfectly up front, you want to say, okay, let me start to solve a problem. Attack real risks and threats, problems that everybody agrees are a big deal, including compliance and developers and managers, everybody, so you can get people on side and say, yeah, this is a real problem. Let's try to solve it. Let's try to solve it as quickly as possible. We won't necessarily get it all solved in one shot, but we'll try to reduce the risk in a meaningful way. And we'll do this in ways that are very efficient, with minimal friction, minimal delays, and that are easy and cheap to implement. And that's what we're going to talk about here, is how to do this in an easy and cheap way. So one of the first wins that I'd like to talk about is adding automated safety checks to your pipelines. Now, why would you want to do this? Again, we're making a lot of changes to the system. We're making changes more frequently. This is one of the ideas behind a lot of these DevOps practices and continuous delivery and continuous deployment is you want to make a lot of small changes, make them often. But that also means that you can make mistakes, right? So if you're not careful, you can make a basic mistake, introduce some kind of regression or introduce some kind of unsafe default, and it's pretty easy to do this kind of thing. And because it's easy to deploy it and efficient to deploy it, these mistakes will make it out into production very quickly. So the idea is that you want to have simple, fast checks that can find bad mistakes before the bad guys do, before the attackers can pick them up through scanners or something. And I like Netflix's model here about idea of putting in guardrails, right? So this is part of your guardrails for your development team. You want to keep them on the safe path, help them catch errors, which are natural. People are going to make mistakes. And you do this by running continuous smoke tests in your test environment. Containers like Docker and cloud platforms make this really easy to do, efficient to do. And by putting in a framework, you can quickly add more checks when new threats come up. And you're going to make your auditors happy because they can see that policies are actually being enforced. You actually see that security checks are being done and made. And you start to familiarize developers with security tools and testing. So all the kinds of basic stuff you want to add into your pipeline. You have default missing credentials, SSL, HTTPS settings, and whatnot, checking for ports that shouldn't be open and making sure file and user permissions are set correctly. These kinds of things tend to regress fairly easily. There's some good frameworks out there. You can use, take a look at Netflix Security Monkey or Conformity Monkey as reference patterns. There's Gauntlet. It's probably the most famous of these test frameworks, right? It's a test wrapper over other tools. OWASP Zap has a nice baseline scan that you can plug into your pipeline. It runs for, I think, 2 minutes or something, minute and a half, something like that. And the idea there is it does a unauthenticated scan of the quick unauthenticated scan of the surface of a web app. If it finds something within that very, very fast scan, then you know you're in trouble because some other automated scanner on the internet is going to do the same thing. Some other excellent tools out there, OS Query that Facebook open sourced that you can use SQL to check your configuration, write all kinds of queries, and you can integrate OS Query into some fleet management systems and be able to run queries across your entire infrastructure and just check to make sure that things are looking good. I also really like InSpec. It's an open source compliance testing framework that's the nice people from Chef have made available open source. And you can use that to assert configuration policies in language that your compliance auditors will understand. It's a beautiful thing. And of course, there's built-in cloud services too, so do this kind of thing. So the second quick win is lightweight risk assessments. And what you want to be able to do here is people are making decisions, teams are making decisions very quickly, and we want them to be able to make these decisions even faster, right? So we have to make sure that we are always on the lookout for risks. So what you want to be able to do is have some kind of upfront risk assessment that's made before a project starts, before a service gets, development on a service gets started. And any time that the team makes a major change in direction, so if major new requirements come in, or if they're throwing out technology and deciding to introduce some new technology because they've decided that whatever they're doing doesn't scale or they're not happy with it, you want to be able to do a quick risk assessment. You also need to understand all the data, or the main parts of data that the service or app handles, and if there's any privacy or compliance requirements, and so that you can get these security and compliance stories onto their backlog and make sure that security now becomes visible to the team, visible to the managers, visible to people outside the team, so we can say, okay, great, they have some certain problems that they want to be able to take care of. And I also, again, going back to another Netflix analogy of a paved road, you want to find out whether or not the team is using technology that's already proven, that you already understand, that you already have good controls in place for. essentially saying that that road has been paved over. You know that you can have the proper tests and scans in their pipeline, and if not, you can add things in pretty quickly. So there's a nice model out there called, actually the one I like, one of the ones I like the best is Mozilla's Rapid Risk Assessment. You can just do some Googling, you'll find that. And the whole idea here is it's a 30-minute review, very quick review upfront, lightweight review, follow standard checklist, identify the key risks, identify any of the build or continuous delivery toolchain requirements for testing, scanning, that kind of thing. And again, if you don't already have something, you got to put something in place. And you can, and one of the nice things is you can use that to feed into an organization or project-wide risk heat map. That's one of the practices they follow at Mozilla and organizations like PayPal. And it's a nice model because now you know this project's a medium risk, low risk. It's a red, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff, potential risks there, and you can start to monitor it from a governance standpoint. And do all this with very little time and very little cost and friction. A third quick win is all about writing security tests, security unit tests. And this is something that I think a lot of developers struggle with, and they struggle with getting introduced into their practice. But one of the best ways to start is to, as you find vulnerabilities, take a test-driven development approach, which is to write the test first, to duplicate, to make sure that you know that the vulnerability exists, you can prove that it exists. And then have them fix the vulnerability and run the test and make sure that afterwards that the test passed, right? So the kind of the whole red-green model. What's nice about this is a few different things, right? Once you start introducing this approach into things, you start off slow and small. So you're saying we find a new vulnerability in pen testing or something, and we agree it's an important thing to fix. We've now got a test in place, so that test shows them how to test for these kinds of problems. It provides evidence to auditors that you've actually fixed something, and you start getting developers to get off the happy path, right? So most production developer unit tests and acceptance tests all prove that the code works, not that the code that doesn't check for things where the code might not work. And so what you want to be able to do is get them to write not just happy tests, the developer tests, but you want to do sad tests and bad tests. And I love this example here, a little discussion, about the different kinds of testing, right? With a QA engineer walking into a bar and the different kinds of things that a QA engineer would do versus what a pen tester would do, right? So all the different kinds of, so going from boundary testing to going into actual injection attacks and those kinds of things, introducing developers into this whole way of thinking is going to make a huge impact on your development in development over time, because even though you're taking small steps, at first you're only introducing a handful of tests, but over time that test suite gets bigger, and over time people start thinking different. They start writing better tests as part of their normal development, which protects more new code going in. So you're not just talking about the modest steps that you're taking to start off. Your quick win number 4, securing the software supply chain. And you would have heard about this a lot, and you will already be aware of it quite well if you're a Sonatype customer. So we already know that vulnerabilities in third-party code expose your systems to serious risks. And we all want to be prepared for the next heartbleed. So one of the things to do here is to start by understanding what outside code your engineers are using and those security vulnerabilities and the technical debt that you have. So any code that you're using that's been abandoned and no longer supported, now to date, and of course license risks and those kinds of things. One of the things I like about introducing this into a pipeline and into the workflows is that it's actually relatively easy to do. There's some lifting to do up front, but once you do it, you've got a nice control system going forward, right? And I know that I've listened to some of the other presentations already about how far some of these organizations have taken this, and it's really impressive, right? So again, you create the baseline bill of materials, then you can monitor things going forward, catch exceptions, and start to create your own internal safe repos to reduce your risk to outside code. What's nice about this is that the heavy work is done up front, and it's all about understanding your build environment, your build and packaging. And that's something that you've got to do anyway. So it's something that it's important for teams from an operational risk standpoint and development risk standpoint, as well as security and governance risk, right? You want to understand how you build and package things, what your dependencies are, right? And then you take a look and put in tools that will help you do this, right? And there's a number of tools. One of the things to keep in mind here is that some of the tools don't identify transitive dependencies, right? So if you might have some relatively simple tools that just do a superficial scan and a superficial dependency map. Those ones won't give you the full advantage, right? You still have some other risk sitting out there in your dependency chain. And so you can take advantage of some relatively straightforward tools. Some of them are open source here. Some of the ones, some of the more popular ones, right? OWASP dependency check, retire.js. Of course, there's Nexus Lifecycle and Nexus Lifecycle Firewall. Those are there's commercial tools, obviously, but they provide a lot more control and a lot more capability and reduce your risk to a greater extent. And then there's other nice things, right? I mean, GitHub's actually started to put in security alerts for some of their dependencies and this kind of thing, right? For some project dependencies. So we're starting to see this problem being dealt with in more ways with more tools, because it's a serious problem and it's a good problem to solve. So it's one of the first ones that you want to take advantage of. And the last thing that I put in here was around self-service code scanning. So what I'm talking about here is taking advantage of software scanning tools, looking for bugs and bad practices in code, and taking that out of the security and compliance team, getting that into the development team, and making it part of their responsibility. This to me is one of the more powerful of the scanning kind of capabilities. It's very complementary to the dependency scanning. So now what you're doing is you're saying, all right, dependency scanning is telling you about any kind of components that have known problems. This kind of scanning, static analysis scanning, is going to go out there and try to find other problems in your existing code base. And what's nice about this is it fits into your workflows and into the tools. There's getting to be more and more tools that work nicely inside the IDE. You've got pre-commit hooks now if you're using Git workflows. And you can add scanners into pipelines so that you can do all this and make it part of the development team's responsibility. These are problems that they find, problems that they can fix right away, and that don't basically creep into the code base. So if you can make this a nice tight loop, you'll see problems getting fixed very, very quickly. And the other thing is that if you are doing code reviews, or where you do code reviews, the use of these scanning tools will improve, basically backstop and make the process more effective and efficient, because code reviewers don't have to step into and look at all kinds of details. So there's all kinds of good tools out there. If you're in the Java space, now there's essentially a little ecosystem of tools. If you're in open source, where you take spot bugs and the find security bugs plugin and the FP contrib plugin, stick them all together, and you've got a very nice little ecosystem that does very good checking for you. .NET, there's some wonderful new stuff built on Roslyn. So there's some great tools out there now that weren't available even a couple of years ago. There's all sorts of other nice ones out there. Like I said, the Git space has got some very interesting additional checks that you can do to check for things like secrets and other stuff that's another common problems in your code base. And the key here is that you want to make this efficient, tools that find problems, high fidelity problems very quickly, and that you can still run your other deeper scans, more complete scans, compliance scans or something further out. But in most cases, what's happening is people are making small changes. The mistakes will be small mistakes. They'll be pretty obvious to find. So what will happen is that if you're running fast scanning on a continuous basis and then deep scanning on kind of like an intermediate or periodic basis, you'll be able to catch a lot of the problems in a very effective way. So obviously this is, you're on a journey, we haven't actually reached the end here. We've only started with all these quick wins. In my experience, deep, real change to culture and workflow and work and development practice takes a long time. It takes years to get people to really change and to understand things. But the quick wins will get you started. These are things that you can work on. They create touch points between development teams and security teams. If you have if you need to create relationships, show progress, you can build on the incremental success, and it gives you opportunities here to find, to get developer buy-in, management buy-in. It's a good thing. So I'd recommend going back and looking at an approach to taking an incremental approach, solve real risks, do it quick and easy as you can, and don't try to force new workflows or practices on the team. Try to adapt to how they work. I've listed a whole bunch of resources that I found really handy, that I think are very helpful to people. So that's for later. You can look at that when you get the presentation and download the slides or whatever. And oh yeah, I wanted to point out one. There's one at the very bottom. It's an old book that's now been released, a relatively old book, if you want to think of it, a classic in the web operations space called Release It. And there's a second edition that's just recently come out, end of last year. It was early this year. Anyways, it's been updated for DevOps and continuous delivery and that kind of thing, and it's a must-have. If you have the old one, you should get the new one. If you don't have the old one, you should get the new one. So, fantastic book by Michael Nygaard. It's definitely a need. So, thank you for listening, and thank you, Mark and Derek and everybody else for setting this up.
Sure. Jim, when I'm looking at this, one of the things that I would be interested in is, as you look at the 5 points that you put there, is there one cherry pick that you would start with from the patterns that you've seen?
To me, I guess it depends on where your risks are and how much new development or something that you're making, right? So if you're yeah, that's a very valid point. To me, I think like I said, it depends on what your risks are, how fast you're trying to move. I mean, like if you have a big code base out there already, a natural one would be the dependency management stuff, right? So it's I'm not just throwing that at you, Mark, because of Sonatype, but it's a valid one. Like if you've got a big existing code base and you want to try to get security in faster, that's a good place to start. If you're moving really quickly and you're iterating a lot and throwing a lot of stuff out, I would suggest some kind of the safety checks, right? Because we've done different things in different teams and different projects because of different risks, right? But if you have somebody that's we're changing a lot of things, changing direction a lot, putting in some safety checks there will at least catch mistakes, right? And catch the changes in direction. So those would be two that I think, because other ones take a little longer to fit in. If you think about static analysis, it takes a little longer to get buy-in, a little longer to implement properly in tune, but the other ones are faster, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, the questions are already lining up in the chat room, so we'll kind of close you off here. So if you would run to the Slack channel and then upload your slide deck there, and you've got a question already waiting for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, very much.
Thanks, Jim.